Hello.
How's it going? Welcome to the next episode of SG Explain.
All right, let me just go and share this. I think that's a routine we have to always do, which
Yes,
is
we are incredibly social, and as Willie goes on his social medias, we shall be opening up with exactly what this topic is all about, which is water. Uh, and there's a reason why we've chosen water. If you guys tuned into our episode last 2 weeks ago, you would have known that Willie and I are on this journey to understand what it means to be Singaporean. And that's a very complex question, and we know that we won't be able to find an answer anytime soon.
right.
But we decided to tackle it in as many ways that we know how. One of it, which is a conversation that always seems to repeat itself, water, right? And that's happening with what we're seeing in Malaysia. That's happening with what we're seeing even with rising water costs and in some of these news situations. So exactly what does it mean in Singapore? What is the concerns like, and the whole shebang? That's what we're going to dive into today.
I think we've been trying to talk about a subject in the last few episodes. At least we opened this year with what exactly is a Singaporean, and then think that there are things that actually identify us as Singaporeans, and especially something that's really close to home and really identify us in our culture and the way we do things. It's actually water.
Right.
Yeah, which is why I think today it's very appropriate to talk about it as well, especially since there's some tension across the border, and I think that we want to revisit exactly what is going on with Singapore and what's the deal between Singapore and our neighbors in regards to water. Why water is such an important discussion through the years. Even I think our leaders like Lee Kuan Yew has emphasized the importance of water, and I think if you actually dig, there's really a rich history of how water and the situation of water in Singapore is like.
Right.
Yeah, it shapes the way we do things.
I do want to say that right before this, Willie and I were deciding the title for the show, and we went through some interesting names. We were talking about thirsty Singaporeans, for those who get that joke. The wet and wild history of Singapore.
Wet and wild history of Singapore.
Yeah. So if we come up with certain water puns along the way, just flow with it. If you get
what I'm saying. Okay. Yeah. That didn't come from me.
I'm not gonna waste a shot. I'm not gonna waste a shot. We're gonna have a lot of puns over here.
All right, those guys who just tuned in, thanks for joining us tonight. Today's topic is about water, and if today we just want to tell you, maybe a question for tonight for everyone to really think about is: can you imagine Singapore without water? Well, if you have, if you can, please leave a comment. If you have something that you want to ask about water and how water in Singapore is like, please also leave a comment. Then we'll try to answer your questions as well. If not, maybe let's just dive in today into this entire thing. Yeah. So today I actually did my homework in this. I spent my Sunday trying to figure out this. How do I structure today's discussion about water? And we're just going to run through basically the situation of water today. What's next? The four taps. We're talking about the four taps, right?
I learned this in social studies as well.
The four taps of Singapore. We're going to be talking about the politics surrounding Singapore's water. Right. And of course, what exactly is the future of water in Singapore?
Right.
Yeah. So maybe let's just dive in, all right? Okay. So
sure. We're diving in.
Yeah, we're diving in. Oh my! So water has and will always be a precious resource in Singapore. I think we all can't live without water. In 2015, the Washington-based World Resource Institute identified the city-state as one of 33 out of 167 countries most likely to face extremely high water stress by 2040. Wow. Right. Singapore is going to be facing a water stress in 2040.
Right.
So to help overcome the absence of natural water bodies, the Singapore government has come up with innovative ways to expand and diversify Singapore's water resources. And over the years, you know that PUB, our National Public Utilities Board for Water, has created sustainable supplies from 4 different sources. And we talk about the 4 taps. So they are the local catchment. We have imported water. So I think that's why the debate is most about, right?
Imported water mostly from Malaysia.
We have reclaimed water such as NEWater, and we have desalinated water, which is basically taking water from the sea and making it into drinkable water.
Right.
So these 4 sources are actually what we call the 4 national taps.
Right.
And have really come a long way to help Singapore meet its water needs. So this basically is essentially how we are surviving in Singapore, such a small island, and how we actually are sustainable in having what do you call it, potable water,
Right.
and that we can consume.
I'm curious though why we have. So I know we are a dense country,
Yes.
right? And we have a decently large population. Well, large by relative standards, but objectively, compared to some of the other cities in the world, we're not that large. Like New York has so much more people, London has so much more people, just by pure volume. So why is the issue so tight in Singapore? What is it just because we don't have access to water, or is it because we're actually consuming too much water?
True. I think it might be both because our access to water, since we're an island, but places like New York, I mean, you could get your water sources from outside or the surrounding New York State, for example.
Sure.
Yeah, in the rural areas, suburban areas, you can
Right.
extract water to actually supply into the city.
Right.
But Singapore, unfortunately, does not have sovereignty over areas that they could extract water from.
Right.
Yeah, so this
No,
actually
I
lacks.
agree with
Yeah.
you, and I don't think anyone would deny that our access to water is one thing. But I also question, is it because we are consuming too much water? Maybe
It's true as well.
right.
Yeah, and I think that also our consumption is tied also largely to our industrial use for water as well.
Right. So I'm seeing here that water demand in Singapore is currently about 430 million gallons a day.
Yeah.
Just to provide some context to our listeners, that is about enough to fill 782 Olympic-sized swimming pools.
Wow.
And if you were to divide that up, 45% of their water consumption comes from homes and non-domestic. So that's industrial, that's recreational, that's everything else.
That takes up 55%. Yeah.
Right. So actually, a big amount comes from non-domestic,
non-domestic use. Exactly.
Right.
It's kind of like half-half, right? Don't you think so? Like 45% domestic use for homes and 55% comes from industrial use as well.
Right. I don't have any way to. What do those numbers mean then? Are those good numbers? Are those bad numbers? Because I'm also saying that by 2060, our total water demand could almost double. So that's from 465 million to probably around 930 million. But out of that 930 million, 70% is going to come from the non-domestic sector.
Exactly.
So that means our industrial demand for water, our recreational demand for water, all of that is going to be one of the major sources for our water constraints.
Exactly.
Which
I mean, as I suppose as Singapore moves into more high-tech technologies or manufacturing or sectors that uses high amounts of water, I suppose that's why there's an increase in this demand as well.
Right.
Yeah. So I think what's unique possibly to Singapore is that we incorporate both our industrial areas and the residential areas in a very dense area,
right.
and the consumption for both are actually taking a lot of water.
Right.
But maybe in cities, I'm not sure whether certain cities actually have industrial areas, or rather the industrial areas are in the suburban areas.
Yeah, I mean there are different ways that countries and cities plan themselves out. Like places like the UK, you have livable cities and then you have industrial cities.
Precisely.
Right. So there is that delineation. In Singapore, all of it is together. Yeah. So you're right. I mean, even with and I'm sure we'll talk about this later on, but about water price hikes and all this kind of stuff. Actually, the biggest people that public policy experts were more concerned about weren't really homes. Sure, to a certain extent, maybe low-income houses would be affected by the price hike, but it was actually the industrial sector. Because if you think about, for example, a semiconductor, a fab plant, they are consuming so much water, right? Because they need to basically have that much going through their factory. If you increase the price by just a bit, multiply that by the pure volume that they have to go through, they are going to be the ones affected the most.
No, of course, definitely. And interesting enough, I mean, just to give it more facts, is by in 2060, right? NEWater and desalination will meet up to 85% of Singapore's future water demand.
Right.
So this is actually pretty encouraging, if you ask me.
So NEWater and desalination are water processes that Singapore has some control over,
Exactly.
more than imported or catchment water.
Right. So maybe let's just look at some charts, all right? So right now, like you mentioned earlier, the domestic sector is using about 45% of the water and 55% in the non-domestic sector.
Right.
Right. So they come for supplies from local catchment, imported water, NEWater, desalination, for four types essentially.
Right.
In 2030, that's going to be 40% domestic and 60% non-domestic.
Right.
And in 2060, like you mentioned, it's going to be 30% domestic and 70% non-domestic sector. It seems like we are growing in the industrial or non-domestic area for our water consumption.
Right.
Yeah, as we go through maybe in the next 40 years.
What are the sources of some of this increases? Like why where is this data from?
This is Public Utilities Board.
Right. So where does the PUB think all this non-domestic demand is going to come from? Do they think that we're going to be developing more industries that are going to just be more water intensive? Are we building water theme parks? What's happening?
I think as we are taking more intensive technological things, like for example, wafer fabrications, or maybe some high-tech or high-level manufacturing, or precision engineering, which requires tons of water.
Right.
I think this is where the sectors they're also growing, because we can't. I think in Singapore, if we are growing, say that requires a high amount of what do you call degrees and people with higher amounts of intellect in trying to do all these things. I suppose high-tech areas are going to be growing in Singapore as well.
Sure.
Don't you think so? Yeah. So I think these are the industries that they're predicting that will be growing up based on the trends that we've seen over the years, and economically, what's this going to be impacting our water sources?
Right.
Yeah. So just to give it a basic idea, I think this is essentially what's going to be progressing in the next 40 years for us. Right, but really, sometimes I think it's also good to know our history a little bit.
Yeah,
what do you think?
I'm a big fan of history. Let's get a sense of history on this.
Sure. So, Singapore's water reliance really stretches all the way down to even past our colonial times. And since this year is about bicentennial, it'd be good to also recap exactly what went down and how maybe in our bicentennial, how they came to Singapore. I mean, even Raffles, when he came to Singapore, how they actually source for water supplies, and water, how they actually supply their ships for all these things. So let's look down a bit of history, right? So local water supply and the first water imports during colonial time. So the history of common water supply in Singapore began with the construction of the McRitchie Reservoir.
So that's the first reservoir.
That's the first common water supply.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the first common water supply. But actually, if you think about it, the history of clean water is actually even before this as well, before the McRitchie.
Oh, okay.
So maybe just let me just go into one area. I think we covered in our previous episode as well about this particular thing. Do you remember there was this hill that was supplying water?
Yeah.
And then there's a well that was actually one of the first few identified areas for water supply in Singapore.
Okay.
Yeah. So during the time when Sir Stamford Raffles actually landed in Singapore, why the British actually chose Singapore as a trading post in the first place was because it had access to clean water.
Right.
That's actually one of the reasons.
This hill was Fort Canning Hill, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That was where the kingdom was based. Okay, I like how we're tying back to old episodes.
Exactly, yeah. So in fact, digging a well for drinking water was among the first tasks ordered by Raffles when he landed in Singapore. Right. And 8 months later, the British completed building a reservoir near the foot of Bukit Larangan, now Fort Canning Hill. Right. Despite being rudimentary, the reservoir had an aqueduct that carried water to a plaster line tank sited at the edge of Singapore River. Right. So this tank had a spout that actually was used to help where small boats will come along and actually fill that water and carry it back to some of the larger ships. So these were actually water sources that during the time that Fort Canning was actually supplying water for ships. Yeah.
So this was our first reservoir.
This was our first reservoir, essentially.
So this reservoir doesn't exist because they built over it. Fort Canning Hill now, I don't see a reservoir there.
Actually what happened was that in 1830s, right, the demand actually exceeded the capacity.
Okay.
And furthering on, what happened was that the water source actually ran dry. So
Okay.
yeah.
Seems like history could be repeating itself.
Yeah. So essentially, because the demand was so much to the point where people were just extracting water out from the ground, and they just couldn't. They're just too slow.
Right.
And then it really outstripped actually water in that area. So to actually circumvent the situation, this is why we talked about why they actually built the first common reservoir, first common source, which is the McRitchie Reservoir.
Yes.
Right. So 1823, the British resident John Crawford proposed spending 1,000 Spanish dollars to build a new reservoir. But this did not materialize. In 1852, the government surveyor engineer John Turnbull Thompson suggested drawing water from the Singapore Creek, which is supposed to be a Singapore river. So we actually tried to find different sources.
Right.
But that
1823, just to provide some context, is 4 years after Raffles
Yes,
landed in
correct.
Singapore, according to the 1819 timeline. 1852
Mm.
is a grand 33 years after he landed. So even 33 years after he landed, there was still not too much of a government concerted effort to provide water. That's actually quite
and they tried to do it
disappointing.
again. Yeah, and they tried to do it again by trying to dam. I think it was trying to dam the Singapore River and try to get some sources, but they still couldn't get the idea. The idea couldn't go through.
Right.
So in 1857, the idea of having a proper reservoir resurfaced again when Tan Kim Seng, a wealthy Straits Chinese merchant, donated 13,000 Straits dollars to the local government to improve the town's water supply. And this was essentially what happened, that Singapore actually was growing growing eightfold from 10,000 to 81,000.
In a span of around 36 years.
Yeah, that's right. It was a growing port essentially.
Right.
Yeah. So with Tan's donation, the government began building plans in January for a new reservoir and waterworks. But when cost estimates ballooned to 100,000 Straits dollars, the Bengal presidency in Calcutta, which administered the British colony fires, refused to sanction the project. You need to understand that this was the time that was the British East India Company, and these were actually very expensive things that were trying to do.
What is 100,000 Straits dollars? That sounds like a lot of old money.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah,
sounds because what I admire about this, and this again is an appreciation of Singapore history, is that it took someone who was a Straits Chinese to say, all right, you guys are not going to do anything, you British people. I'm going to come in and do something. I'm going to give you the starting fund.
Right.
And then after that, the government was like, all right, we'll do something. And then even then they were like, well, it's gotten too expensive.
Yeah. But anyway, to cut chase, the Bengal government finally agreed to fund half the project. So the remaining was actually raised through a loan. So the new impounding reservoir, this common reservoir, renamed to the Thomson Road Reservoir in 1907, and thereafter as the McRitchie Reservoir in 1922.
Oh, so it has three names. It had the impounding reservoir as its first name, Thomson Road Reservoir as its second name, and by 1922 it was the McRitchie Reservoir. Okay.
That's right. But it began its operations in 1877, which is exactly 20 years after Tan Kim Seng's philanthropic gesture. So this is actually our first reservoir.
Very cool. I did not know that.
Yeah. So a long history of trying to get
the McRitchie Reservoir is huge.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that's where the treetop walk and the huge forest. Oh, okay. I know it's one of our most iconic reservoirs. I didn't know it was our first.
Yeah, it was our first reservoir to try to. So I mean, fast forward, by the end of 1900, Singapore's daily water consumption had surged to 4.5 million gallons. And of course, this was due to a booming population.
Right.
So they decided the best course of action next was to enlarge the impounding reservoir. And they carried out between 1891 and 1894 at a cost of 32,000 Straits dollars. And we essentially have a large reservoir. I think which is why McRitchie Reservoir is so big, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
it's almost like a lake.
Yeah, that's right. So in 1905, they further raised to increase its capacity to obtain additional water. But I think this was not really a sustainable thing. So they actually proposed to even build more reservoirs. So after the Thomson Road Reservoir, began operation, let me just go on. There was a second reservoir that was actually being built.
That was in Kallang.
Yes, that's right. And it was called the Kallang Reservoir.
Right.
And then thereafter renamed the Pierce Reservoir in 1922. and Lower Pierce Reservoir, which is the name today, I think, in
Yes, that's the current
1975.
name. Yep.
Yeah, so that was our second reservoir.
Okay.
Yeah, so because we don't have enough water to supply. So water has always been really a big concern in Singapore
Mhm.
when we've been impounding reservoirs and time again.
Yeah.
So
I always thought the reservoirs were like a PAP thing, like our Singaporean government. But it's good to know that even back then the British were like, yeah, we need to be smart about our water. Let's build catchment for it.
Yeah, and I think this water, the need for water stretches all the way. I mean, in the bicentennial, it was a 200-year-old history. This need for
It's
water,
more than 200.
yeah, it's more than 200. This need for water has been going on for quite a while.
Right.
Yeah, and
as you mentioned, one of the reasons why the British came was because we had water. Yeah. So our ability to source and do with water it's a big part of our history, it seems.
So furthering on, I think Pierce warned that the water situation will end in disaster unless large and bold measures were taken, because we're really expanding. And so the municipal council's initial solution was to construct a third reservoir at Seletar, and now renamed as Upper Seletar Reservoir in 1992. So we, as a growing country, or as a growing trading post with so many people, there was always a need to try to build the next reservoir, and there was actually a race to see how we can actually get more water.
Right.
Yeah.
What I'm seeing here is that initially they wanted Seletar Reservoir to be as big as the Pierce Reservoir.
That's correct.
But this was also around the time where an alternative scheme came up, which is the Johor water scheme.
Exactly.
So instead of making Seletar Reservoir too big, they said, all right, we'll make it just sufficient, and we'll actually focus on supplying that amount of water that we're missing out on from Johor.
That's correct.
Okay.
So that was the time where we started to have water sources coming up from Johor.
Right.
So so the idea of importing water from Johor came as early as 1904, after Pierce predicted that Singapore would continue to face chronic water shortages even if it were to develop all of its potential water resources on the island.
Right.
So even if we try to dam everything, according to him at the point of time, we won't have enough water. So over the next decades, Skudai River, Lingui River, a tributary of the Johor River, and Palipa River in the state of Johor were identified as potential water sources for Singapore.
Right.
And finally, in 1923, the Municipal Council concluded that the best solution was to obtain water from Gunung Pulai in Johor due to its height. So essentially what they were trying to do was that because it was a high water source, and through gravity, they could then easily just transfer this water to Singapore.
So is this us trying to buy that water, or are we actually buying the land and so what happened there?
So you need to understand that during that point of time, Malaya and Singapore was still like a one country kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah. So
they were all under the British.
Yeah,
area.
that's right.
Yeah.
So what they were doing is just trying to transfer water from another place.
Okay.
It wasn't a territorial concern at the point of time.
Right.
Yeah. So these were things that, of course, between states there are some exchanges and some currencies that they actually talk about. But I think we'll cover that later.
Okay.
But essentially, this was how our appearance or reliance on water from Johor actually came about, because there was really not enough water in Singapore, even if we tried to fill all the dams and all the reservoirs. So that's why we needed Johor's water for Singapore to try. So the development of the Gunung Pulai scheme, which cost 22 million straight dollars, involved the construction of a series of dams to create a 1.2 billion gallon impounding reservoir at the mountain's ridge in 1927. And the second 3.2 billion gallon reservoir located 5 miles away in Pontian Kecil in 1931. Okay. Yeah. So these were actually the areas that we actually that was invested to build water sources for Singapore. And
in Gunung Pulai, there were they created a plant to do treatment as well.
That's right.
To do treatment of the water. So so what I'm hearing is that they created some dams. They developed a waterworks in Malaysia, or rather what was back then Malaya, and then from there they piped all the treated water across into Singapore.
That's correct. So I think there's also some history also, as I think that should already give you an idea and so forth about the history of how Singapore started to have imported water from Johor. So that actually should give us an idea why this history actually came about in the first place. I think in to further on, well, Singapore also started to build things like unprotected catchments as well to increase our water ability to actually harvest water as well.
Right.
So McRitchie, Upper Pierce, and Lower Pierce Reservoir located in the Central Catchment Nature Reserve. As it's not possible to build new reservoir within this gazetted nature reserve at the point of time it became a nature reserve, the PUB had to look elsewhere for water. This is really fast forward when the PUB was already in power. So the PUB has already been established. In 1972, the agency released the first water master plan, which charted the long-term development of water resources in Singapore. And one innovative method adopted by PUB was the creation of a string of unprotected catchments across the island. Unlike protected reservoirs, such catchments are located in urban areas, using water that is of low quality and with high organic matter. But what they do is that they improve the filtration process and methods so that they're able to then harvest this water for Singapore to consume.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a decentralized way of collecting water.
Correct.
The Central Catchment Reserve, by the way, is a fascinating part of Singapore that I think a lot of us just take for granted. In that we are a small island, but we have this huge part of the island right in the middle that is just pure forest and all these big reservoirs, right? Like the upper and lower Piers and McRitchie.
Yes.
That's crazy that we as a country have decided, no, we're going to keep this. And I'm glad that we have, and there's always going to be more debates about, development versus conservation. But yeah, that the fact that we have the Central Catchment Reserve is a big win for Singapore.
Of course, yeah. And of course, I think if you ever been to the city skyline in Singapore, like for example, you've gone to Marina Barrage, right? And that's also actually a catchment area as well.
Right.
So the Marina Barrage actually is the 15th reservoir that Singapore has. Just trivia as well, there are 17 water catchment areas in Singapore.
All 17 reservoirs?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, or at least a size of a reservoir.
Right.
So these the 15, and of course it serves to store water, alleviate flooding, and also to have recreational activities as well. So it actually adds to the whole city skyline. So this was one of the more prominent areas that you actually get to see across in Singapore skyline, which is the Marina Barrage area and the Marina, the Marina supposedly water catchment area.
Right.
Yeah. So this is pretty interesting, and this is one of the areas in which Singapore did to actually obtain water and build essentially our to address the need for water over 200 years essentially.
Right.
But I think moving on, Singapore also realized that trying to essentially obtain water by yourself through your own catchment and trying to import water from Johor, it's not going to answer to all our water needs. It just isn't enough. So further on, to reduce the reliance of water across like imported water, or really to just try to keep damping, was building these things called desalination plants, as well as water reclamation systems as well. So they are like NEWater and also desalinated water essentially.
Right.
So a recommendation in 1972 of the Water Master Plan was to use reclaimed water and water that has been purified to a high degree. But that this was not an entirely new concept. Industrial water was first introduced in 1960 with the construction of Jurong Industrial Water Works to supply non-potable water for industry. But I think at the point of time, the water technology was not very effective.
Right.
Yeah. So this thing of water
it's
reclamation,
non-potable water.
yeah, it's non-potable water. So then these plants actually were supposed to then in 1974 experimental plant in Jurong that tried to do all this water reclamation was actually decommissioned. Yeah, as the water purification technologies available then were unreliable and expensive. So Singapore has already tried to reduce its reliance of water from imported water as well through reclamation. But unfortunately, technology wasn't matured enough to do those processes.
But we started in 1974.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so it will take another 25 years before technology catches up. And now that we have water reclamation technology, and now we call it NEWater, right? Yeah. So it conducted in 1998 revealed that water reclamation was a growing trend globally and that membrane-based purification technology had become more reliable and cost-efficient. This led to the opening of the prototype NEWater demonstration plant at Bedok Water. And soon, we were actually reclaiming water in 2000.
Right.
Starting with 2000.
I remember in 2000
Yeah.
I was around, I'm telling my age, I guess, but in 2000 I was around, what, 7 years old?
Mhm.
And I remember as a primary school kid being given my first bottle of NEWater.
Yes.
And I remember drinking it and being like, huh, this is water. And then everyone, like, it was a whole, it was Prime Minister Lee.
Yeah.
No, was it Prime Minister Lee? No.
In 2000, was it Goh Chok Tong?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone drank NEWater
That's right.
during the rally.
Yeah, that's right.
Was it Goh Chok Tong?
I think it was.
Probably,
Yeah. As a form to say that it is safe to consume this water.
Yeah.
But really, if you understand the process of NEWater, actually it's ultra pure water, and actually
even purer than potable water that you would think is something.
So ultra pure water actually is not good for human consumption. Right. Because it will strip off minerals from our body. So as it goes through your body, it will actually strip out all your minerals. So ultra pure water is actually not good for us.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So that was actually how clean or how advanced the water purification technology is in the NEWater plant.
Have they fixed it now? Is NEWater not that pure anymore?
Oh no, it's not that. I mean, with this understanding, actually, what they did was they blended NEWater with raw reservoir water.
Oh.
So the subjecting mix actually allowed for trace minerals to be added to your water sources.
Okay.
So of course, then again, the ultra clean water could be used for industrial use.
Right.
But if mixed with reservoir water, would actually be much more potable for human consumption as well. So this was actually NEWater. So I remember the history. Like we were worried, like this like poop and pee water.
Yes.
Yeah, I was like, am I going to drink my own poop and pee? But I think soon enough, I think everybody kind of forgot about it, right?
Right. I mean, again, the technology and the way that we kind of committed to that process is something that is indicative of a Singaporean virtue, right? Which is that, hey, we have a constraint, we have a problem, we have a limitation, but rather than see it as something that will limit us, we try to find ways to create opportunity out of it.
That's correct.
And water is a very key part of that because, as we mentioned, we have limited access to water. Probably less prominently, but slightly, in my opinion, more significantly, we have increasing demand because we have more people, we have more industrial needs, and it's not really sensible to say, hey, cut down on your economic growth because you don't have enough water. But at the same time, like how do you try to solve that problem? And all of that kind of pushed us in a very big way to over 25 years develop what is now one of our key technological strengths, NEWater.
Right, that's right. So now that we touched on water reclamation and we talked about the 4 types earlier. So we had water coming from reservoirs, right? Catchment areas. We talked about importing water from Johor. Now we talked about NEWater, and that's a 3rd tap. And now we're going to talk about the 4th tap, essentially. So the 4th tap is actually desalination, right? So in the 1972 Water Master Plan, also recommended tapping seawater as another source of water supply. However, minerals and salts have to be removed from seawater first in the process known as desalination. Unfortunately, as the desalination technology available at the time was energy intensive and costly, the PUB decided not to adopt this method. So fast forward this, in 2005, desalinated water officially became the 4th national tap. Right. So if you think about it, it's almost like kind of like over 30 plus years.
I'm a bit curious why we would do desalination if we already had NEWater. Is desalination just because even the articles and what I'm reading says that NEWater reverse osmosis basically is more energy efficient. Right. So why desalination?
Because water reclamation can only generate a certain amount of water to Singapore.
Okay.
So there's not enough production of water for for example, if we want to stop imported water, for example,
Right.
there's just not enough water to be placed back into our industrial usage or our total usage as well.
So then we need to draw from the sea.
That's right.
And if we draw from the sea, then we need to undergo desalination.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So
that actually surprises me, because desalination in my mind seems like a much more
intensive
and also less technologically complex
okay.
System compared to reverse osmosis. I could be wrong. I have very limited knowledge of that, but
sure.
It seems interesting that desalination was our last tap.
Right. So anyway, to go on, in 2005, desalinated water officially became the fourth national tap, right?
Right.
With the opening of the first desalination plant in Tuas, I think this name became a household name. It's Hyflux,
Right.
wholly owned subsidiary. Sing Spring Private Limited won a bid with the construction of a desalination plant under PUB's design, build, and own and operate model. So this actually supplied 30 million gallons. But you need to understand Singapore's total consumption is way more than those 30 million gallons.
We said 465
yeah,
million.
exactly. So in 2013, Hyflux won the second bid to construct the second desalination plant to supply over a 25-year period. And by 2020, Singapore is expected to commission 3 more desalination plants in Tuas, Marina East, and Jurong Island. So by 2060, Singapore's total water demand could almost double.
Yeah,
this is what we said earlier.
Yeah, but I think what should be noted is that Hyflux is also controversially, like they basically had to file for bankruptcy.
That's right.
Right?
That's
because the whole process of DBO, design, build, own, and operate, it takes a huge amount of burden on Hyflux. You get to own more of your profits, but obviously Hyflux wasn't able. I actually, based on what I read, what I understand is that this desalination was a huge cost, and that Hyflux wasn't able to handle that huge cost.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which actually may have caused it to go under. That's what you're saying, right? Yeah. But anyway, Singapore is still dedicated to make sure that we continue to build more desalination plants, right? Singapore built more desalination plants, and in fact, raising that to another 3 more plants in Tuas, Marina East, and Jurong Island. So that will actually make, as we talked about earlier, by 2060, almost 85% of Singapore's water future needs will be met by water reclamation as well as desalination.
Yes.
Yeah. So of course, there are other water strategies that Singapore tries to do. For example, a deep tunnel sewerage system,
right?
Which is almost like 48 kilometers long deep sewer tunnel running from Kranji to Changi. Centralized water reclamation plant at Changi. 2 deep sea outfall pipes and 60-kilometer links. I think this is partly a storage and reclamation system,
right,
that actually goes at beneath Singapore, really invisible.
This is already built.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So I think Singapore is really serious about it, trying to make
it has to be. That's what we were just saying.
Yeah, but why is that so? I mean, why is it that Singapore is so hard out about water and making sure that we are self-sufficient in water and making sure that we have enough water and also to meet the growing demand? And this really is I would say some political struggles that we have, especially during the separation from Malaysia, that actually told us that we should actually be more self-sufficient in the water supply, and how we actually consume as well as deliver water to the population.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it starts with a very simple, but maybe we do need to rehash this, with a very simple understanding that water is important for survival.
Yeah, that's right.
And not just water for survival, but also water as a key prerequisite for a good quality of life. Being able to shower, being able to have clean water to cook.
Yes.
Right. All of these things make your life better. And in Singapore, we want to make sure that at a baseline, everyone has access to water.
So earlier you asked, why is it that we can't actually do more NEWater, for example,
right?
And stuff like that. Maybe just to give an idea of how each of the different categories or the 4 taps actually deliver the amount of water. We'll give an idea of how far we are away and the amount of resources necessary to build these systems and how much water they can generate.
Yep.
So rainfall collected in artificial reservoirs that we have really built, right, actually supplies about 200 to 300 million gallons a day.
Right.
Okay. And imported water from Malaysia is up to 250 million impure gallons per day.
Right.
Right. So we see that the reservoirs as well as imported water about the same, right? About the same depending on the time of the year or the amount of rainfall. Reclaimed water only gives us about 115 million gallons a day.
Mm-hmm.
And desalination actually gives out about 15 million gallons, or officially only 10% of the demand that we have. So I suppose also it is the capital intensiveness of delivering such systems and infrastructure versus water as well that we can get from other sources as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really a cost and a cost study as well to how much investment we can have. We need to actually build water self-sufficiency as well.
Yeah.
I think recently also the government actually raised the cost of water to actually its residents as well.
Right.
I think in view of the fact that the amount of capital needed to invest towards such water resources as well, or water infrastructure. Yeah. So
but also a big part of that was the fact that they hadn't increased the water prices for
a very long time,
which was
exactly.
kind of their fault. They should have been more smart about raising their water consistently, rather than making it a surprise.
But essentially, reclaimed water and desalination water only fulfills less than, I think, maybe 40% of our water needs now, and still largely the bulk of our water needs actually needs to come from imported water as well as the catchments that we already have.
What I find interesting is that I'm reading here that the chairman of the PUB admitted in 2012, so this is around 6 years ago, that water self-sufficiency could be achieved well before 2061. Wow. So we genuinely believe that we can be self-sufficient.
Yes.
We don't have to import water.
Correct.
That's
we will get there later about why there's a need for self-sufficient in Singapore.
Yep.
But yes, we could actually be well ahead of the target by 1961. But just to give 2061.
1961 is way past.
Oh yeah. So just to give you an idea, we talked about reservoirs, and I earlier mentioned there are 17 reservoirs in Singapore.
Are you gonna list them out?
Yeah, I'm just gonna list them out so that if you live near those areas, you know where you are.
Okay.
So there's the Bedok Reservoir, Jurong Lake, Kranji Reservoir, Lower Pierce Reservoir, Lower Seletar Reservoir, MacRitchie Reservoir, Marina Reservoir. We talked about that.
That's a barrage.
Yeah, that's a barrage. Murai Reservoir, Pandan Reservoir, Poyan Reservoir. I think that's up north. Pulau Tekong Reservoir.
Oh, that one I know.
Yeah, of course, we all know. Yeah. Pongo Reservoir, Serimban Reservoir. Serimbun Reservoir. Sorry. Serangoon Reservoir, Tengah Reservoir, Upper Pierce Reservoir, and Upper Seletar Reservoir. Coming to 17 reservoirs in total.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we are going to be building more, but I think that's really a lot of reservoirs for a really small island.
Well, if you think about it, building a reservoir is going to take away land in already land-scarce Singapore. I doubt that we'll have the capacity to build more reservoirs.
Yeah. And already 2/3 of the country's surface areas are classified as partly protected catchment areas with certain restrictions on land use, because we need to capture the water or the rainwater and collect it as drinking water.
Yeah, so we've already given up a lot of our land.
Exactly. So the next thing is, of course, water from catchment, and the next thing is, of course, is imported water, which is from the Johor. I think it's through the Johor Singapore Causeway.
Yeah.
And I just trivial also the causeway also carries a railway, if you want to know. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So as of 2009, imported water has been reduced from 50% previously to 40% of total consumption.
Wow.
Yeah. After the expiry of a 1961 water agreement between Malaysia and Singapore in 2011, two agreements are in force now, so which I'll touch on later.
Yep.
One was signed in 1962 and another in 2000. Both will expire. Both of them will expire in 2061. So just to know why we keep talking about 2061, which you earlier highlighted, is the date of the expiry for when Malaysia has we will need to recontract with Malaysia or have a different arrangement with Malaysia on how water is to be brought into or imported into Singapore.
Right. So we have a runway of around 42 years now.
That's right. Correct.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and 42 years to become either self-sufficient or have another deal with for imported water.
42 years is when my generation is going to be in power, probably, right? Or maybe
In
even
power? I thought you're already in power.
no, like yeah, this is our problem.
So it's a really interesting time. I think we're going to be living through. Those who are viewing, probably you'll be living through this time where we'll see the end of this contract in 2061. So if anything you didn't listen out today, just know this date, 2061. That's a very critical date for Singapore to see whether we can reach self-sufficiency in water. All right.
I like how, if you actually think about it, the fact that we set up a plan in 1962 to last till 2061, that's nearly 99 years.
Right.
That's a 99-year-old water plan.
Yes.
How did we agree to that? How did the other side agree to that? It's a very long-term plan. You would never sign a 99-year plan now.
Right.
Maybe a 99-year lease, but not a 99-year water plan.
Well, you do sign a 99-year HDB.
That's what I said, a 99-year lease. But you know that you're going to probably sell that. Like, you know that plan, that lease, that HDB lease, in some ways you can sell your property at some point. There's a contract that you can break. Whereas with this, it seems like there's much more rigidity to it. I mean, on Singapore's side, I'm glad we did it.
Right.
Like the fact that we have affordable water being bought, but at the same time, like it was.
Well, I suppose our leaders really think ahead. I suppose. And therefore that's why we come with such really long contracts.
Right.
And people at the point of time when they formulated the contract couldn't see the end of 99 years when they actually signed it. They couldn't visualize how 99 years will change a lot of things as well. Yeah. So that's why I think people were very daring enough to actually sign these. Maybe they said that things won't change so much after 99 years.
Yeah.
Who knows? Yeah. But I think in today's society, maybe we become our attentions are much shorter, so we think that 99 is wow, I need to do more things.
I mean,
in a year
I will also say that I think a lot more things happen in one snap of a finger today than they probably did a long time back.
Right.
And that maybe that's also because we just have access to so much more information at the snap of a finger.
Right. So maybe we talked about so much about the 4 tests, but maybe let me just go into one area that we haven't really talked about, and that is actually PUB's water conservation efforts.
Okay.
Right. So actually, in line with the fact that we've been trying to build water infrastructures, was the other portion was to educate the public on the importance of saving water. And I think that, I'm not sure where you lived through. I lived through a point where we actually had to ration water as well. Have you ever done that?
You had to live through that?
Yeah. We had water rationing exercises that we had to live through.
I want to say that I remember something like that, but I cannot say for sure.
I remember my mom putting a bucket in the bathroom. Yeah, so that during the water rationing exercises, we only could use that bucket.
Is this exercises, are these just actually because something happened, or is it just because they wanted to prepare us?
I think it's for preparation.
Yeah, so I remember those. I remember that they would have one day where they would say, okay, we're gonna cut the water supply and you're gonna have only this much water. Yeah, I remember something.
Yeah, but do you know what's the history of that? Why do we have water rationing exercises?
Oh wow, I completely forgot that we did that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Somewhere in history sometimes we actually take it for granted. Yeah. But why is it that we have water conservation exercises, and we actually lived through some of the exercises as well? Was that in 1963, a severe drought swept through Singapore and our neighbors up north, forcing the authorities to issue an urgent appeal to the public to use less water until the water levels went back to normal. Unfortunately, the public did not heed the appeal, leading to water rationing that lasted 10 months from April 1963 to February 1964.
Yeah, it sounds like classic game theory.
Yeah.
It's basically everyone saying, well, if everyone else is going to be getting water for themselves, I probably should as well.
Yeah, of course.
And then
nobody tries to ration the water as well. But essentially, what happens is that there became an enforcement of water rationing, and people actually had to take buckets and actually fill their buckets with water, and then essentially that's all they could use for the day.
Wow.
Yeah. Right.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. So what then, following on from this 1963 history on water conservation, right? Slowly through the years, PUB started to educate the public on the importance of water. So in 1970s, PUB launched its first national water conservation campaign, adopting the slogan "Water is precious." Okay, yeah, pretty straightforward, right? Community activities showed people the do's and don'ts of using water, and the campaign was publicized in newspapers, radios, and television. And also, if you don't know, there was this mascot called Bobo, the water-saving elephant.
No way.
Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Yeah, and it
I know Charity. I know Singa.
Yeah.
We have Bobo.
Bobo, the water-saving elephant. It
Right.
actually became a television cartoon series
Right.
on teaching people how to save water.
Okay.
Yeah, in 1970, that's pretty cool, right?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe we should do a revival of some of the mascots in Singapore.
Maybe not.
Then PUB chairman Lim Kim San, who was also education minister, stressed that to save water only when there is a drought is not good enough for us in Singapore. Saving water must become a daily habit with us. So that was the 1970s, right? In the 1980s, right, there was another month-long "Let's Not Waste Water, Precious Water" campaign. Was launched on the top of water conservation talks in schools. And essentially, it was another reminder to the public about the importance of saving water, and it was introduced into schools to understand Singapore's water challenge. And of course, the ones we probably lived through a bit more, in my memories, actually in the 1990s, right? So public appeals to cut down unnecessary water use were made after a long dry period. Then Minister of State of Foreign Affairs and Finance, George Yeo, reminded people that water is a matter of life and death. And it was also the time where we introduced this thing called the water conservation tax.
Yeah, and that still exists.
Yeah, it still exists to the day.
Yeah.
So if you actually have looked through your bill, on your utilities bill, you'll see this particular tax called the water conservation tax within your utility bills. So if you ever wonder what this is actually a tax to incentivize people to save water. So the more water you save, actually there'll be less tax. The more water you use above a mark, then of course more water conservation tax will be imposed onto you and your family as well.
And this is also in the 1990s. I can see here that was when they had the campaign with the water rationing.
And that's where we lived through.
But only with 30,000 households. So we were probably part of those 30,000.
So this is a 6-day campaign involving water rationing, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know why. Maybe it felt like a lot more people were actually doing the water rationing.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Back then, our idea of our neighborhoods were much smaller. So maybe just knowing that our neighbors did it felt like the whole country was doing it.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, my neighborhood was my kingdom back then. That was it.
I think reminisce to this, we don't really have much water rationing exercises anymore.
Thankfully.
Thankfully. I think we.
So okay, when you said Bobo the elephant, sorry guys, I just saw this. But I was thinking of who is our mascot today, and I remember that there is a mascot. It's Water Wally.
Water Wally, exactly.
Yeah, if you go to the Marina Barrage or any kind of PUB event, you'll see this giant droplet, blue droplet.
Yes.
Water Wally. I still hate Singapore mascots.
Why? I thought Water Wally was pretty interesting.
I just think that they trivialize a lot of the issues, but that's a discussion for another day, Willie.
Sure.
We can dive into it.
But I remember there was a Water Wally advertisement.
Right.
That's kind of creepy. Water Wally was just like peeking into people's bathrooms, and people were like really happy and surprised. They were kind of creepy.
I get the sense that we both don't like Water Wally.
I thought Water Wally was okay, but I mean, just the creepy bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in 2010s, I mean, which is why we are where we are right now. I mean, we have a lot more things like social outreach and things that actually help us to save and conserve water.
Things that are a bit more nuanced, which I like compared to Water Wally and Bobo the elephant.
Right. Maybe let's go into just a brief on what exactly are the political areas that water and Singapore is really very closely related.
Let's bring it all back to what's happening today.
Yeah. So we talked about how we were actually importing water into Singapore in the early 1900s, right? So we earlier talked about when this happened was actually 1927. So 5th of December 1927, right? Okay, so there were actually 4 different signings between Singapore and Malaysia, and the first signing was actually in 1927. So this agreement in 1927 actually allowed Singapore to lease 2,100 acres of land in Gunung Pulai. We talked about it earlier.
Yes.
An annual fee of 30 cents per acre for the purpose of supplying raw water to Singapore. Singapore was not charged for water. So in 1927, Singapore was only charged for renting the land that were generating water, and not charged for the water.
Okay.
All right. So just know that in 2nd of October 1961, the Tebrau and Skudai Rivers Water Agreement. It replaced the 1927 agreement that allowed water to draw from Gunai Pulau, the Tebrau River and Skudai River for a period of 50 years. Oh, another long time, right?
Right.
So Singapore paid an annual rent of 5 ringgit per acre and 3 cents for every 1,000 gallons of raw water it drew.
So this is both rental and
That's right.
the cost of water.
Correct. After the agreement expired in 2011, Singapore handed over the Johor state government the Gunung, Pulai and Skudai waterworks, as well as the pump houses at Pontian and Tebrau without any charges and in good working order.
Okay, so basically we developed all of those waterworks.
Yes.
I'm not completely sure how much of cost was borne by maybe the Malaysian government. Maybe there was some. Maybe there are costs that we don't know. But for the most part, we can say that the development was done by the Singapore municipal authorities or whoever was based.
Oh, it was an investment by Singapore.
And after all of that, we just gave it.
Yeah.
How we said
to return it. Yeah.
The agreement ended. We'll give you this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this water agreement has also been superseded already. Right. So now there are 2 outstanding agreements that we have with Malaysia.
Right.
And so that is the 29th of September 1962 Johor River Water Agreement.
Okay.
Right. This agreement is still in effect today and allows Singapore to draw 250 million gallons of water per day from the Johor River for a period of 99 years until 2061, which is the date we talked about. Singapore pays rent for the land it uses at the standard rate applicable to the use made of such lands and in the particular building lots on town land.
So it's market rate.
So market rate, exactly, for the land that this water facility is.
Yeah.
And also pays for the water it draws at a rate of 3 cents per 1,000 gallons as well for 1962.
Okay.
So this is one of them, one of the agreements that still is in effect.
Mm-hmm.
In 24th of November 1990, there was another agreement which supplements the 1962 water agreement and still valid today. All right, the agreement allows Singapore to purchase treated water from Johor in excess of the entitlement of 250 million gallons per day of untreated water under the 1962 agreement. Right, Singapore bore the cost of constructing a dam across Lingui River and maintaining it. So we actually built this dam. Yeah, and Singapore also paid a one-time upfront payment of 320 million ringgit as compensation for the loss of land use, a premium of 18,000 ringgit per hectare, and rentals for the remaining tenure of the agreement, calculated annual rate of 30 ringgit per 1,000 square feet. So this same agreement will also expire in 2061, along with the 1962 agreement.
Oh, okay. So I understand. So what we're saying is that basically the first agreement permits us to buy 250 million gallons per day at 3 cents per 1,000 gallons.
Yes.
Right? If we want to touch anything more than 250 million gallons per day, the second agreement provides for that because we have basically built a dam and we're able to tap into all of that water at the same cost at 3 cents per 1,000 gallons.
Correct.
But we had to take on a much bigger cost because we had to pay for the dam, we had to pay for the opportunity cost of the area and everything.
Actually different. So the September 1962 agreement actually allows us to draw raw water. The 1990 agreement actually allows us to purchase treated water from Johor in excess of the entitlement of 250 million gallons.
Okay.
Yeah. So what happens is that we purchase both raw water and treated water.
Do we know the cost of the treated water?
Unfortunately, I can't find out this information at the moment. But what I think is very important for Singapore is really the September 1962 agreement, which talks about the 250 million gallons of raw water. Yeah, which I think Singapore actually takes it and treats it, and then thereby selling it back to Malaysia for treated water as well.
Right.
Yeah. So this supplementation in the 1990s, whether Singapore actually uses it is a different topic for another day as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what really is the important agreement here really is the 1962 agreement to purchase 250 million gallons of water per day.
Yeah, and if you tie it back to this topic of a potential drought, a potential dry spell, and our need for conservation, then what does happen if one day we are A, not self-sufficient, B, something does happen in terms of water shortage, and C, when we do try to tap onto our neighbors, they say no. Maybe they're not. It's not poor intention, not ill intention. They just say we're having struggles as well, and we need to provide for our people. And Singapore is just going to be left without its own water, right? So I get it. I get why we need to be self-sufficient. I mean, it's duh. But if you really think about it, especially because Singapore would not have regular access to all of their water, then that becomes a huge issue.
Exactly, right. And I think because there's some things about why Singapore needs to have water reliance is I think, like, for example, in the separation in 1965, the then Prime Minister Tunku Abdul Rahman said that if Singapore's foreign policy is prejudicial to Malaysia's interests, quote unquote, we could always bring pressure to bear on them by threatening to turn off the water in Johor.
Oh, so remember how I mentioned that they could be not ill intention?
Yes.
Yeah, they could also be ill intention. Which is what this is.
Malaysians point out that this statement should be seen in the context that Malaysia and Indonesia were engaged in confrontation at the time, and the remark referred to the possibility of Singapore siding with Indonesia.
Okay.
Right. So I think the contention of water, whether it was siding or whether it's really in a different context, was really a topic for politics.
Right.
Water is life,
right.
And therefore this was something that why it's so central to Singapore's political discussion as well. Then just to add on as well, that we had failed water negotiations with Malaysia from 1998 to 2002. So in 1998, Singapore began new negotiations with Malaysia to extend its water agreements beyond 2011 and 2061.
Right.
In return, Malaysia initially asked to increase the water price to 60 cents per 1,000 gallons, corresponding to 4 US cents per cubic meter. This price was too much lower than the cost of desalinated seawater or NEWater. However, in 2002, Malaysia asked for a much higher price of 6.4 Malaysian ringgit per 1,000 gallons. That's $6.40 ringgit. 640 ringgit per 1,000 gallons.
Yeah.
And arguing that Hong Kong paid the equivalent of 8 Malaysian ringgit per 1,000 gallons for water from China. Unfortunately,
this was the same price as desalinated water.
Yes.
So Singapore basically said that, that doesn't make sense for us.
Yeah. So Singapore finally refused to accept a higher price and decided to give up its goal or to extend agreements beyond 2061. So instead, the country decided to achieve self-sufficient in its water supply before 2061, and the negotiation ended in 2003 without result.
Yeah. So we've given up on trying to get more water from Malaysia.
Yes.
We basically said, there's very little likelihood that you're gonna, in good faith, give us a fair price or maybe even a cost competitive price.
Correct.
And we might as well use that opportunity cost and develop our own self-sufficiency mechanism.
That's correct. So this date of 2061 becomes a very central date to achieving self-sufficiency for Singapore.
Wow.
For water. So I think if there's any takeaway from today's topic, really is how does Singapore reach that level of self-sufficiency in 2061. Yeah. And I think you can see why desalination plants are built based on phases, even NEWater phases, and when are we going to be ramping up to make sure that all these plants and these capabilities are enough to fulfill all our water needs in Singapore.
So maybe just to summarize, what I'm hearing, and Budi, thanks so much for navigating this huge complex monster of a topic, is that there are probably a couple of reasons for why we have such water policies. The first and probably most prominent is security.
Yes.
The second is livelihoods. We want to be able to provide a basic quality and standard of life in Singapore.
That's correct.
The third is some kind of cost management. So even with the way we do NEWater and desalination, all of those point in some ways to how we manage the cost of water in Singapore. Yes. And the fourth is basically just because at the end of the day, we want to be able to be proud of the fact that we can do it by ourselves, right? And I think that's a big part of what it means to be a country.
That's right.
as a society, and a lot of that, like being able to not be dependent on someone else, it's a big deal. Yeah.
So actually, you can already kind of see how Singapore is going to be achieving this in the future. So what happens is that why are we building all these desalination plants? As you can see, the Sing Spring desalination plants actually creates about 50 million gallons of water a day. So if each plant produces about 50 million, and we actually, you can see the number of plants that we're building. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And 7 plants will give us about potentially 350 million gallons a day.
Right.
Yeah.
That should cover around
That should
one
cover
third of the needs by 2060.
correct, and that would completely cover with growth of the 250 million that imported water is actually given to Singapore,
Right.
or rather to sold to Singapore.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So this is actually how Singapore is doing to try to reach its self-sufficiency, and also still making sure that we can actually pay for this as well. Yeah, and to reach that level of water security in Singapore. So if I were to sum it up today, essentially is that water has been a very central discussion in especially in this bicentennial of Singapore, and very always at the back of the head. Sometimes almost invisible, something we take it for granted, but water is really an essential discussion for all Singaporeans. Whether it's water security, your livelihood, whether it's for economic progress, whether it's for just for us to shower. Really, water, it becomes a really important facet in our everyday life and the survivability of Singapore. And until 2061, or rather until the day that Singapore reaches self-sufficiency, I think this will always be at the back of our heads as well, continually as we progress as a nation as well. Yeah.
Wow.
Great.
Well, we hope that this wasn't too heavy for you guys, and if it was, then it's fine. You can re-listen to us in small chunks on our podcast. Thank you for tuning in. I feel like I learned a lot today. If you are listening to us on podcasts, do share, subscribe, rate. Your reviews and your sharing does help more people get to know about what we're doing. And again, if you are ever curious about what we're doing, check out some of our earlier episodes to see some of that. But yeah. I hope this is a great. It's a long topic today. We exceeded the hour mark. Yeah, we've been trying to bring it down. we went over.
It's just
today.
so content rich. This entire thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in. If you have any more questions, please leave a comment below, and we'll try to find something new, interesting topics for you in the next time round.
Yeah.
You know, I was thinking about that whole mascot thing. Maybe we can talk about mascots of Singapore.
Sure.
But in due time, thanks for tuning in, guys. See you next episode.